PSG 2, Arsenal 1, and of course PSG progress through to the Champions League final as 3-1 aggregate winners. So there is just one big question really. What went wrong for Arsenal? Now, if we actually take the stats on face value, it doesn't look like too much went wrong for Arsenal at all, really, in this game. Arsenal had much more possession than PSG, which is something that Arteta would have wanted. Arsenal had the higher expected goals, which, again, is something that the manager would want. And Arsenal even had territory and field tilt in this game, suggesting that Arsenal were the dominant team. Again, something that Arteta always demands. So why couldn't they get the job done? Why did Arsenal not win this football match? Especially considering the fact that they started the match so fast. PSG were trying to play the ball out from the back, and quite frankly, they couldn't because Arsenal were pressing with such an aggressive intensity. Martinelli, Marino, Saka, Odegaard, Rice, all of them coming forward to join the high press. This meant that PSG couldn't really play the ball short. In situations like this, you can see PSG choosing to send the ball long, and when PSG did send the ball long, Arsenal were there to win it. This is why Arsenal started the game so well, because PSG couldn't get on the ball, they couldn't play out, so they went long, and Arsenal in these positions have the more physically dominant players. You know, the PSG front three, as talented as they are, they're not physical specimens. The Arsenal backline are, so Arsenal were able to win the ball back. And like I said, they started the game really well. Arsenal settled on the ball very quickly. They looked comfortable in possession. The players were knocking the ball about quite well. And I think Arsenal did a really good job initially of pulling PSG into different areas, particularly down this right-hand side with Bukayo Saka and Jurrien Timber. I think Timber played such a key role in the opening 30 minutes of this match. You see, what he would do is rather than coming deep and getting involved in the build-up phase over here, he actually went really high up the pitch really early, sometimes almost into a sort of inside forward position, if you like, sometimes really wide as the winger. But what this did was it forced Kvaratskhelia to go with him. It forced him really deep. Now what this means is that Arsenal now have more players than PSG here, so Arsenal can get on the ball and play about. And there's some really nice examples of this early on if we just take a look over here. You can see Timber and Bukayo Saka both really high up the pitch. And that forces Mendes, the PSG left back, and also Kvaratskhelia, the left winger, into these really deep positions. That means that over here, Arsenal have now too many players really. So PSG can't get pressure on the ball because their players are being forced back into defensive positions. And this is why Arsenal early on were able to get on the ball. And it means that you can progress the ball down the right-hand side quite easily because Kvaratskhelia isn't there. And Arsenal did this really well. You can see it again in this moment here. Two players, Timber and Saka, really high, pinning the two PSG players back. And Saliba has all the time in the world really to carry the ball forward here before then looking for the big switch. In terms of after that, Arsenal continued to progress the ball fairly well. Ball progression was not something that they struggled with in this game. They were able to move the ball forward quite quickly, quite comfortably, get into the final third. And realistically, what Arsenal were looking for all night was Martinelli 1v1 against Hakimi. And I think Martinelli had that battle early on. For the first 30 minutes, I think Martinelli was causing a lot of problems. He just sort of faded out of the game as it went on. Realistically, the bigger threat was on the other side with Bukayo Saka, particularly when Timber moved inside, taking Kvaratskhelia into those areas, leaving Saka 1v1 against Mendes. And Mendes is one of the best fullbacks in world football, one of the very best at the moment. And Bukayo Saka at times made him look really average because that's just how good Bukayo Saka is. The problem is, and we highlighted this last week as well, by the way, they don't have much else apart from Bukayo Saka. That the Arsenal front line is just lacking killer instinct, and I don't know who you blame for that. Is that Arteta's fault? I don't know. I don't know how much say he has in recruitment, for example. Is it the board's fault? I don't know. I don't know who's to blame. But the problem is, on these big nights, Arsenal don't have enough in these positions because we've seen they could progress the ball forward. Tactically, Arsenal was set up reasonably well. And if we just move forward a little bit to these situations, Saka was on the ball time and time again in this game, picking the ball up in these positions. And 1v1, he's just amazing. He can go both ways. He sort of offers that threat down the line, but then cuts inside. Mendes didn't know what to do with him. This ball here from Saka is beautiful. It's a great ball into that area where no defender wants to go. Defenders hate facing their own goal, and you can see if they want to deal with this ball, they physically have to face their own goal. But Arsenal, there's nothing in there. There's not enough. There's players in there. You know, numerically, there are plenty of players in there. But there's not that killer instinct in the final third. Arsenal lack it outside of Bukayo Saka. It happened again in this moment here. You can see Saka had Mendes on strings because Mendes knows that Saka can go both ways. So Mendes is in trouble here. He doesn't know what way to show Saka. This time he shows him down the line and Saka goes, all right, I'll beat you down the line then, mate. Goes down the line and again puts an amazing ball in. And this was really the problem. Arsenal played well for large parts of the game, for 80% of the football pitch perhaps. But if you can't score goals, you can't win football matches. If we now just take a moment to look at PSG on the ball, we see something very, very different. The game is completely different for PSG for what it is for Arsenal. You see, PSG were looking to build possession in a back three. So you've got Mendes dropping in alongside the two centre-backs initially. Hakimi is going to push forward, allowing Barcola to come inside the pitch. And the game plan from PSG, just on face value here, is fairly simple, right? They want to build possession with the back three to overload Arsenal's two in the first phase here. And what they want to do constantly is pin Arsenal back and stretch Arsenal with just an insane amount of width. You can see Kvaratskhelia on the left-hand side, initially holding this wide position, and Hakimi is going to play really wide on the right-hand side. Now, what this does is it forces Arsenal to basically always just having to be checking their shoulders. If PSG are really narrow, really compact with the way that they play on the ball, Arsenal can see where their men are. You know, Yuri and Timber, for example, take him in his position. Let's say Vitinha's got the ball. If Kvaratskhelia is narrow, Timber can see Kvaratskhelia, he can see the ball, it's nice and easy for him to deal with. However, the second Kvaratskhelia pulls a little bit wider and Vitinha stays on the ball, Timber's now got a bit of a problem because he's got to look at the ball, but he's also got to turn and look at his player. And it's in those moments where problems can occur. In those moments where you're switching between what you're looking at, that's when killer players like Vitinha, Ruiz, Kvaratskhelia take advantage of you. And they move the ball very quickly and they cause huge problems. I think what really adds to this for PSG, though, is the rotations that we see within these positions. So the sort of set structure tends to be the same. PSG tend to have three across the back and they tend to have width. But in terms of how it operates almost in these areas, it is quite rotational. They move into different positions. There's moments where we see sort of a line of three where Fabian Ruiz, who was previously one of the higher midfielders, will now drop into like a left centre-back role. Vitinha will move into left centre-mid and Mendes comes into this position. You can see it here. This line of three sort of highlights just how rotational PSG can be with their movements, and they're so difficult to pick up. Arsenal, largely, are a very good defensive side. The likes of Partey, Rice, but also Martinelli and Saka. They tend to get their distance in pretty good. They're close to each other, they can jump, they're compact, they're difficult to play through. They get through a lot of work in that midfield, Arsenal. But when you play a quality side like PSG, they have that, right? They have that quality. That's what it is. These players are given the license to roam and move about in these positions. And when you give players like Vitinha and João Neves in particular, I feel, but also Desiré Doué coming off of that front line, you give these players license to roam, to drift, to pick the ball up and express themselves in 1-versus-1 situations, to pick up the ball and try things. When you allow your team to do that, and Luis Enrique does that amazingly well, when you allow good players to express themselves, you tend to see good moments in football. And that felt like, for large parts of the game, the difference between the two sides. It felt like Arsenal could express themselves through Saka, whereas it felt like PSG could express themselves through the entire attacking front line and even the midfield. Just because the technical quality, the way they move the ball, the way they scan, they play under pressure is just so impressive. It's very difficult for Arsenal to match. The other problem though really for Arsenal was the transitions. So for all the praise that I have just given these PSG players for their ability to operate in tight spaces and things like that, they were actually at their most threatening when they could attack large spaces in the transition. We know that Arsenal came into this game a goal down and they wanted to kind of set the tempo early on. They wanted to be attacking. They wanted to kind of impose themselves on PSG. To do that, Arsenal were pushing players forward. We saw the fullbacks taking up higher positions than what we normally would. The two centre-backs, in a situation like this, don't actually have a player outside of them. They had the midfielders in front, but nothing else. And that was because Arsenal were trying to get on the front foot. The problem is, PSG are insanely impressive on the counter-attack. And for all of Arsenal's good play, for me, PSG should have scored 4 goals last night because they don't score this chance on the counter-attack and they don't score this chance on the counter-attack either. So whilst we can sit here and say Arsenal deserved better or deserved to win or the scoreline was harsh or whatever, PSG also could have scored 2 or 3 more goals. And the big difference for me is the penalty areas. I say this all the time on my channel. By the way, go check it out in the comments, AJ Analysis. But football matches are decided in the boxes. You can do so much work between the two boxes. You can tactically overload teams, you can technically dominate a team, you can take the ball away from the opposition. But ultimately, it's about how you perform in the boxes. And I have a criticism of Arsenal here, because Arsenal, we know, are known for perhaps lacking something a little bit up front. And I think that's what people will talk about after this game. The fact that Arsenal didn't score enough goals, they didn't have a striker, whatever. People will talk about that. But it's also about the other box as well. I think when you're Arsenal and you're known as being the side which are not going to blow teams away with your attack, but you're going to be really solid defensively. Really solid defensively. If that's the case, then you've got to be that. You've got to be really solid defensively. And Arsenal were not over this tie, in my opinion. Too many individual mistakes from Arsenal. Thomas Partey for the second goal. It's criminal play on the edge of his penalty area. It's unacceptable to be that unaware on the edge of your own box. And that was the problem for Arsenal. They came into this game knowing that they probably weren't going to put 4 past PSG, so they had to be secure defensively. And over the tie, they conceded 3 goals. They had a penalty against them as well, and should have conceded more. So, yes, Arsenal do need to strengthen the attack with recruitment. We mentioned that last week. But I also think defensively, Arsenal just let themselves down a little bit with individual errors. Now, that's not something that you address with new signings, by the way. Arsenal don't suddenly need an overhaul. They're fine. For so many parts of this game, they were amazing. I just feel, in the big moments, which ultimately decide the biggest games, PSG showed their class. Arsenal didn't. And in a Champions League semi-final, that is the difference between going through and going home in tears. That's how brutal elite level sport is. Champions League is very much elite level sport. I keep saying it. PSG just had that extra quality. So for me, because of that, because of having that extra quality, because of executing in the moment, I think they deserve to go through. But those are just my thoughts. My opinions on this match, I want to hear yours in the comments down below. Was that harsh on Arsenal, or did they kind of get exactly what they deserved because they weren't quite good enough? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. But apart from that, we are finished for today. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed it. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.